welcome to Temple Talk from Jerusalem, Israel. Rabbi Chaim Richman here together with Yitzchak Reuven. Today is the 22nd day of the month of Tevet, 5778. It is January 9th, 2018, and this Shabbat, the second Torah portion of the book of Exodus, Parshat Va'era. And let me mention that this Shabbat is also Shabbat Mevarchim. It's the Sabbath of the blessing of the new moon, because next week, on Wednesday, January 17th, will be the first day, Rosh Chodesh, the new moon of the month of Shvat. So in this week's Torah portion, Va'era, we will be learning about the majority of the 10 plagues, the first 7, in fact. And of course, one of the questions that everybody asks when we learn about the whole concept of the retribution that God brought against the Egyptians, the 10 plagues, all of the incredible wonders and miracles that led up to the Exodus, one of the main questions is, well, why did he have to do it this way, so drawn out? Why was it so dramatic? Why didn't he just take them out? 1, 2, 3. He didn't need to go through all sorts of negotiations, between Moshe and Pharaoh. He didn't have to warn Pharaoh so many times. He didn't have to do things in stages at all. He could have just instantaneously brought them out. And of course, well, actually, let me ask Yitzchak if he wants to venture the answer. He's right here.
I'm just going to pose another question.
Okay. That's the Jewish thing to do.
If we're asking why did God take 10 plagues to do what he could have done in an instant, why did God take 6 days to create the world if he could have done that in an instant? Why does God take time and do things in stages when it could be done instantaneously?
I'm going to let you continue.
That's what I got to say. So that might suggest that there's some kind of parallel between creation and the 10 plagues.
Okay, I see where you're going. And that's something that we've spoken about also, the idea of the 10 plagues being a sort of unraveling or disassembling of creation on an elemental level. And that, of course, is because Pharaoh didn't believe in creation altogether.
In case you didn't believe that I created the world, well, I'm going to take it apart now.
Right.
One step at a time.
And it was about control, and it was about God showing how he totally supersedes nature, and that there is no nature. There's only how Hashem himself runs the world. The thing is, the specificity of the plagues also is interesting. Maybe we'll talk about that to some extent in our weekly video lesson as well in Parshat Va'era. But, the main thing is that our sages teach is that this whole thing, the whole world of the idea of I call it a world because it's such a major building block, or such a major fundamental concept in Torah, is the going out of Egypt. We mention it every day. It's a positive commandment to remember every single day that Hashem took us out of Egypt. It's actually part of the daily Shema. And we even mention it at the most important moment of the week, which is the Kiddush, the sanctification of Sabbath, when we testify that Hashem created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th every single week. We actually say that it's in a remembrance of the going out of Egypt. That's how basic the idea of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus, is. And it's because Hashem, his identity was so besmirched before then. His identity was so befuddled, and the doubters and the control freaks were so bent on seizing the power for themselves. And basically what happened in Egypt proved to the whole world that God is in charge. Because what this all boils down to really is this amazing verse, in my opinion. This is where I want to start anyway. In the end of last week's Torah portion, Parshat Shmot, where Moshe is coming to Paro. Moshe and Aaron come to Paro when they give the ultimatum, "Let us go." And the Pharaoh says, first he says, "Who is Hashem?" right? That I should heed his voice to send out Israel. I do not know Hashem, nor will I send out Israel. That was in the beginning of chapter 5. And then, as we read about how he decided, okay, you know what? You guys are disturbing them from their work. You know what? He says to the taskmasters, no longer give them straw. They'll go out and make the same amount of bricks, but they'll have to gather the straw themselves because they're lazy. And that's why they're crying out and they're saying, let us go and bring offerings to our God. And then he says this unbelievable thing, which is as crazy and as absurd as when he said, who is Hashem? I don't know Hashem. He says, let the work be heavier upon the men and let them engage in it, and let them not pay attention to false words. In Hebrew, excuse me. Al yishu b'divrei shaker. Do not be
lying words.
Do not pay attention to lying words. So Pharaoh is calling what Moses is saying a lie, right? This is so unbelievable, this chutzpah, right?
Right.
You know, we talk so much now about fake news. It's all over the place. It's everywhere you go. Everybody's accusing everybody else of talking fake news. No, that's fake news. No, that's fake news. It's become like a real important concept in our society today. Fake news.
Part of the dialogue.
Part of the dialogue, right? This is fake. This is fake news. But how do you do that? In other words, how do you be so arrogant? Like, where does that chutzpah come from? That Pharaoh could say to Moses and Aaron about Hashem Yitbarach, right? About God, may His name be blessed. How could he say, and that the people should not listen to your lies, right? So. It's basically, the idea here is that lies have replaced truth completely, and that's why the 10 plagues and everything that Hashem did with His perfect choreographed detail was such a tremendous sanctification of Hashem's name, because that's what kind of unseated the lie, right? And so let me tell you where I'm going with this, because it's this whole idea of fake news is so all permeating, and you see it in the Torah as well. You see that that's what Pharaoh was all about. Fake news is about like foisting a fictitious reality on your victims, right? In other words, like those today that really are guilty of fake news, and I'm going to really get into this because what's going on here in Israel, because this is disturbing me very much. When people manipulate others. And when they utilize this idea of fake news, as Pharaoh was doing, look, he was the biggest fake of all, because when Hashem told Moshe to get up early in the morning and meet Pharaoh by the river and confront him, we all know, every school child learns the basic Rashi, that's because, our sages teach, that's because Pharaoh made himself into a god, right? There's his banner of fake news. And he told his people that he's superhuman, and he doesn't urinate. He doesn't have to go to the bathroom. He used to get up very, very early, because there were no paraparisi then. Paraparisi is the word. There were no people like accompanying him, taking his picture, autographs, all sorts of things. So he got up early in the morning and he went to the river to relieve himself. So Hashem said, Moshe, you catch him. Paparazzi, right. You know, I read a lot, but I don't talk to people, so I don't know how to pronounce words. So Hashem says to Pharaoh, catch him in the act and confront him and say, I'm on to you. So then he goes and he says, let the people, do the heavy labor, and don't be swayed or don't be encouraged. The word al yishu, it really means like don't be buoyed or don't be filled with hope over falsehood, right? So this week, right, Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the terrorist entity called the Palestinian Authority, right? He goes and he makes a statement in continuing response to the new reality of the truth that Trump has unveil to the world that Jerusalem, as far as America is concerned, is actually Israel's capital, Abbas goes and says, this, and I quote, "Jerusalem and its holy places are not for sale for gold or silver or billions of dollars." Now that is pretty amazing, because it sounds like the man is tremendously passionate and connected to Jerusalem, right? And that, by the way, Yerushalayim is not for sale, is the name of a very popular Hasidic song by Mordechai ben David that was recorded 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And Yerushalayim is not for sale, and it's a Jewish song, that we all sing, that all the settler youth sings and everything like that. And here Abbas goes and he says, like, wow, who was that man? What a noble spirit. Wow, Jerusalem and its holy places, go tell Trump, are not for sale for gold or silver or billions of dollars. That's funny, because Abbas takes billions of dollars and spends them on terror every year. But anyway, then comes along a New York Times. Oh, pardon me for uttering those filthy words. A New York Times report actually reported that there's an Egyptian intelligence officer named Captain Ashraf al-Kholi, who told media outlets in Egypt that he actually supports U.S. President Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem. And the New York Times reported audio recordings of that they obtained, wherein apparently he turned to various influential talk shows in Egypt, these talk shows that are very, very influential in public opinion. And he said, how is Jerusalem different than Ramallah? He said, let the capital of Palestine be Ramallah. By the way, listeners, Ramallah is also part of Eretz Israel. It's also part of the land of Israel. But at least this is a step in the right direction with an Islamic admission that Jerusalem has no connection whatsoever to the Palestinian people. Of course, the Palestinian people are the same Arabs as the Egyptian people, because there is no state of Palestine with any Palestinian separate identity or history. And we've spoken about at length how the whole concept of Palestine and the Palestinian people is fake news at its best, and how it was actually agreed upon by the Arab world as just another device to try and destroy Israel. And we've also provided you with the inventor of that idea and the date, and we can do that again if you like. But the point is, Jerusalem has no connection whatsoever to the Arab people, and as, in fact, another beautiful article, an interview with Mordechai Kedar this week, he said those very words. He said the connection between the Palestinians and Jerusalem is fake news. So fake news is very much part of our lives. Combating it is part of our lives. And that's what was the banner and the clarion call of Pharaoh and his regime. Fake news, like saying to the Israelites, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. He's like saying, don't listen to that falsehood, that lie that there's a one God in the world who's going to take you out of Egypt, and that you're going to go and offer offerings to him. No, make twice as many bricks now. Be busy with all this busy work, so that you don't have time to realize that I'm lying to you. The point being, there's one theme in the Torah, one theme that accompanies us everywhere and all the time, consistently in our lives, and that is that Hashem is true, that there's only one truth in the world, and that is Hashem. There's only one reality in the world, and that's Hashem, and everything else is actually fictitious reality, fake news. And that's what the going out of Egypt is all about, and that's what the 10 plagues were all about. I'm going to prove it to you as we continue studying about it. It was all about disproving fake news. But how do you get off on saying something so absurd, like Pharaoh saying, don't listen to falsehood, and Abbas saying, oh, Jerusalem and its holy places are not for sale, as if they're his to say that he's not selling them, right? When there is no Islamic connection whatsoever to the city of Jerusalem. Go on to a news item that I just noticed today as we go to microphone, that the Defense Ministry of the State of Israel is demanding, they published a memorandum today, demanding that the financial benefits provided to terrorists and their families in the form of cash payments from the Palestinian PA be stopped. How should they be stopped? The terrorist salaries should be deducted from the money that Israel transfers to the Palestinian Authority. You see, Israel transfers money every month to the Palestinian Authority. And as it's said that the Palestinian Authority would cease to exist, they would not be financially solvent if they weren't bailed out every month by Israel. But
and
here's
others. By Israel and others.
And others. So here's a piece of news that says that Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman from Yisrael Beitenu said the Palestinian Authority pays over 1 billion shekels each year to terrorists and their families, encouraging and perpetuating terror. The moment these payments and their amounts are decided in accordance with the severity of the crime and the length of imprisonment, meaning someone who murdered and received a life sentence will receive much more money. This constitutes funding terror attacks against Israeli citizens. There is nothing that demonstrates more the fact that the Palestinian Authority supports terror. We must put an end to this. So listen to these statistics. According to PA statistics, over 550 million new Israel shekels, which is equivalent to, are you ready for this, American listeners? $159,274,500. I'll say that again. $159,274,500 was paid to imprisoned and released terrorists this year. And the families of suicide and injured terrorists received approximately 687 million shekels. That's $198,948,330. And some of this, like you said, Yitzchak, comes from other sources like the United States of America.
Absolutely. Your tax money, your pockets. It comes from your pockets, people.
So that's another example of the lies that are perpetrated. The whole industry of painting a Palestinian freedom struggle as being some noble cause, when actually it is a murderous monster of many heads, whose entire stated goal is to destroy the state of Israel. Settlements or no settlements, Jerusalem or no Jerusalem. It was founded in 1964, before the 1967 Six-Day War that led to Israel liberating the territories of Judea and Samaria and eastern Jerusalem. So that's all a lie. And in fact, to this very, 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 very day, and this very, 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 very moment, Palestinian Authority, headed by Mahmoud Abbas, the same man who passionately cried that Jerusalem is not for sale and that Trump should lay his hands off of Jerusalem, same man pays those incredible amounts of money, hundreds of millions of dollars each year, to support the families of terrorists, especially suicide bombers who destroy as many Jewish lives as possible.
May I just add a footnote to that, Rabbi?
Please.
My footnote is that most of that financial support that enables the Palestinian Authority to pay out these wages for terror comes from the West, comes from the United States, comes from the European Union, and, like you pointed out, comes from Israel. The Arab world, despite their vociferous support of the, quote, Palestinian cause in the past, are not big supporters financially of the Palestinian Authority, and in fact are right now, as that quote from that Egyptian general proved, are right now basically all moving away from any kind of support for the Palestinian Authority, because they're an albatross and they want to get ahead with their lives, and they have bigger fish to fry, one being Iran. And it's the European Union who are the most steadfast supporters of the Palestinian master plan, which is to destroy the state of Israel. The United States, thank God, right now is, at the moment is pulling back from support of this.
But this is a fact that the goal of the European Union, I'm sorry to say, and maybe this is like a way out there thing to say, maybe our listeners will be offended, but it would certainly seem that the European Union has a goal to destroy the state of Israel. That's how they behave, and they do that through the Palestinian Authority as a proxy, to tell you the truth.
They do it through the Palestinian Authority, and they do it under the guise of human rights.
Right. But also, speaking of human rights, so both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu are committed, they say, to dissolving UNRWA,
Right.
which is the United Nations Relief and Welfare Association, or whatever it
Authority,
is, which is
maybe.
basically an organization that has kept the Palestinians in poverty.
It's an organization for the
refugee camps for 60
perpetuation
years.
of Palestinian.
Exactly, for the perpetuation of the myth of Palestinian
refugeehood.
refugees. There's no other people in the world that needs an UNRWA. And the Palestinians that have been kept in by their own leaders in the squalor of, by the way, not all Palestinians live in squalor. You have to see the most opulent and incredible mansions that many, many Palestinians throughout Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, live in.
And Gaza.
And Gaza, it's absolutely unbelievable. The shopping malls in Gaza and all the opulence that they have. But those that are kept in the refugee camps for window dressing for the world to continue pouring in money doesn't even go to buy them food and education and hospitals. It goes to terror. Here's the headline. I'm holding it in my hand. PA spent over 1.2 billion shekels promoting terrorism, not in 60 years, in 2017. And so they're saying, Trump and Netanyahu, that UNRWA, which is an organization of the United Nations that simply exists to filter money into the hands of terrorists, should cease to exist. Same thing every time Israel opens up the blockade and allows concrete to be delivered to Gaza. Instead of building hospitals and schools, they use it to build more tunnels into Israel to destroy the Jewish state. And that's why you read about these casualties of work-related, what they call in exclamation points, of work-related accidents, of all the terrorists that get blown up in the tunnels that they're digging, and the tunnels fall in on them, and the IDF bombs the tunnels because they're trying to dig tunnels into Israel to kidnap and murder Israeli citizens with the concrete that we send them as a humanitarian gesture. So there you have a lot of a world of fake news, and opposite the fact that only Hashem is true. And that's what the state of Israel has to represent, and that's what we're struggling for, and that's what the Holy Temple is all about, and that's what we're learning about in these Torah portions. And come back, because we're going to tell you some very, very, very important things in a moment on Temple Talk.
Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven. With me in the studio, Rabbi Chaim Richman here in Jerusalem, capital of Israel. Today is the 22nd day of the month of Tevet, 5778, January 9th, 2018. This coming Shabbat, we read Parshat Va'era, the second Torah reading of the book of Exodus, and it is also Shabbat Mevarchin, meaning it is the prelude, the beginning of, we say a special prayer, I should say, in anticipation of the upcoming new moon of the month of Shvat, which will be not this Wednesday, but a week from this Wednesday evening, Thursday.
Tuesday evening, Wednesday.
Tuesday evening, Wednesday. My bad. This week's, we're talking about the Parsha Va'era and the first 7 of the 10 plagues, and you were asking the question, why drag it out, Why make it so painful? But on the other hand, God has given Pharaoh every chance in the world to, do the good thing, do the right thing.
It's all about free choice.
Right. The first time, so Pharaoh thinks, okay, so this guy's, he can do it, I can do it too. He sends his...
Anything you can do, I can do better.
He sends his magicians and his wise men, and they also turn the Nile into blood. Okay, that's, you thought that
cool.
I did it too. I'm better than you. I made life more miserable for my own people, but I proved the point.
Oh, is he a Palestinian leader?
Exactly. And then, as it goes along, there is, okay, so this time his Hartumim, his magicians can't do it, and they say, well, there really is a God, and if there is a God, well, pray.
Finger of God, they said.
Right. They pray to God, pray to God, Moshe, that he'll take this away, and I'll give you what you want. And so Moshe does, and then he changes his mind. I mean, again, it's almost comical.
What a politician.
But, it's really, if you think about it in real terms and try to apply it to a lot of things that go on in the world today, it's really not that, it's quite accurate. I mean, this is what many tyrants and deniers of God do in the world, is that they self-destruct and destroy their own people and make life miserable for many, many people in order to prove a point
and
that
they have free choice.
It's about them and
of course,
not about God.
Interestingly, with Pharaoh, at one point, his free choice was taken away from him. But the leaders have free choice, and it all boils down to ego and to this tremendous desire to be in control.
Right, and so that's the real conflict. Who's in charge? God or me? And Pharaoh insisted that it was him. I don't know God, but I do know that I'm Pharaoh, and I'm in charge. So it brings to mind another news item. Pharaonic news item that we both read this week. And I'm going to read this article, which reports on it.
Is this the one from Haaretz?
Yeah.
Before you do that, I think you should just give our readers a warning.
Okay, about Haaretz?
Yes, I think you should explain that this newspaper is just represents just such incredible Jew hatred.
Yeah.
And since it's an Israeli newspaper, that means that it is associated with the extreme far left.
Right.
And that anything that smacks of nationalism, a good feeling, wanting to be Jewish is branded as far right or as being absolutely foolish, or in this case, you'll use the word that they used, but that this is not representative of the people of Israel. In other words, this newspaper is a scourge.
This is a newspaper
and they have said horrible things about good people. They're just an example of the battle of culture that's taking place for the soul of this nation. Who are we? Are we people that are going to be a godly people and bring light to the world? Or are we going to become like the European Union, God forbid?
This is a newspaper that I think is read by about 4% of the Israeli population, but because it also is printed in English, it is the bread and butter for the diplomatic corps of many countries. I know under the Obama administration, they were always quoting from there was a relationship between Haaretz and the Obama administration. Haaretz would feed them news items that they could then quote in order to
Why am I
manipulate.
not surprised?
So, and I believe it's owned by German
investors.
Investors, yeah. Okay, here's the article.
Headline.
Haaretz, quote, anyone who prays for rain is an idiot. Article in Haaretz slams praying for rain as primitive. Public security minister says in response, these same people believe Barghouti will bring peace. We'll get into it in a minute. An article this morning in the Haaretz newspaper dismissing as idiots those who pray for rain triggered a wave of reaction on social media. The background to this is that over the past few weeks... So
you're reading the article from Arut Sheva, which is reviewing the article from Haaretz.
The background is that Israel's been suffering a very serious drought, and we very much need rain. And so over the past few weeks, there have been many, many public initiatives to pray for rain in synagogues around the country. And I think that the chief rabbis also called on people. There was a big a prayer for rain at the Western Wall.
Before you read the article, by the way, after those prayers were held,
rain
there was
fell,
incredible rain.
And,
excuse me, last weekend, I know my house was flooded, and I'm not complaining because there were rains of blessing, and unbelievable rains came.
Another initiative was that Uri Ariel, who's the Minister of Agriculture, invited heads of agriculture in the country to come, I think also to the Western Wall, and pray for rain, which they did. And so in response, this author who writes for Haaretz, his name is Rogel Alfer, he wrote, and I quote, anyone who prays for rain is an idiot. That's the title of his article. Alfer blasts recent efforts to organize prayer sessions for rain amid Israel's current drought, specifically mentioning those of Agricultural Minister Uri Ariel and Chief Rabbi David Lau. He dismisses praying to God for rain as the result of a, quote, primitive worldview. To believe that an all-powerful entity controls the rain and grants it to Jews only after they turn to it, one must be no less than a complete idiot, he writes. Belief that praying to God helps bring about rain, he argues, quote, is inconsistent with the laws of nature. It obligates the believer to deny physical theories whose efficiency have been proven beyond all doubt. Unlike prayers to God, which have been proven throughout human history to be grossly inefficient. End of quote. The article provoked a wave of criticism on social media, including from Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan, who wrote back in response, after thousands of years during which Jews have prayed for rain, and the truth is not just Jews, Rogel Alfer writes in the Haaretz today that anyone who prays for rain is an idiot, Erdan wrote on his Facebook page. It is pretty remarkable that over at Haaretz they believe Barghouti is a jailed terrorist,
convicted murderer of Jews.
It is pretty remarkable that over at Haaretz they believe Barghouti will bring peace, but that belief in prayer is something legitimate is idiotic. Rogel Alfer and his friends will respect every custom they meet on a trip abroad, will cheer Messi at the top of their voices from the stands if he can hear them. Messi is an international soccer star. But when Jews turn their eyes to heaven and ask for rain, they freak out. And I am not even addressing the wonderful commentary of the Rambam, who explains that prayer is intended first of all for man, and its goal is to open our hearts. In short, I'm sorry to tell our friends at Haaretz, but as a believing Jew for whom the prayers for rain have always been exciting, I will continue together with the entire Jewish people to pray for rain. May we have a good and rainy winter with God's help, Erdan concluded.
Wow.
A beautiful response.
First of all, he's an amazing man. He doesn't wear a kippah. He is the minister who, as far as I can see, is solely and single-handedly responsible for the total turnabout and change of attitude of the police towards the Jews on the Temple Mount. And even though, according to the Prime Minister's rule, the status quo is in effect and we're still not allowed to pray there, the police are far more respectful and cooperative with the Jews who visit than ever before. By the way, that leads to another story that we have to talk about today. And he's just talking like a beautiful Jew, that he is saying, how could you not pray for rain? That's exactly what we do. So the thing is that what this article really represents is this incredible struggle. That he's not just saying that praying for rain is idiotic. That author. He's basically saying that praying is idiotic because
belief in God is idiotic.
Right, exactly. And there's no, that hits home so much in these Torah portions because this is what the whole idea is all about. Either God is the reality, or that author's head is the reality. Which is it? Which do you choose? And there's no way to understand Jewish history. There's no way to understand what any of this is worth or why it's significant unless we consider the God factor. And so this is very insidious. This underlying, campaign to denude God from the state of Israel. That's what really is at stake here, and that's what this is all about. And so it's one thing that that's the goal of the European Union. It's one thing that was the goal of Obama. It's one thing that that's the goal of Pharaoh, as we read about. But for there to be that fifth column in the state of Israel is very unsettling. The absolute arrogance and fake news and falsehood of an Israeli so-called author, a journalist in a newspaper article, to brand, should I say,
an entire people,
the entire people, anyone who would have the name of God on their lips as being an idiot. It's just absolutely mind-boggling.
And again, the response of Erdan was just right on target because, as we know, prayer is mainly for man to bring out the best in himself. And
by the way, since Internal Security Minister Erdan is such a proponent of prayer, and since he wrote so beautifully, respectfully, and so colored by Jewish tradition, we should take it one step further and confront him and say, well, since you're such a fan of prayer and you realize the power and beauty of Jewish prayer, please, there's just one thing you have to do, and that's allow it on the Temple Mount as well.
Well, I think his response would be that
he would like to.
He would like to, but that's Netanyahu's call. Exactly. However, as you pointed out before, the actual ban on prayer on the Temple Mount for Jews these days is much less severe, I can put it that way, than it once was. The police will turn a blind eye if you're not too over the top. I've witnessed that.
And there's
which is a
someone
huge
else that's
change.
noticed that and is upset about it.
Yes, the State Department. This is all news. All news. This show.
This brings us to another.
Every year, the United States State Department issues an annual report about
what is the
religious
title
freedom.
of that report?
The annual reports
On
religious freedom.
exactly. The United States State Department has a special branch, and I several years ago actually met with an officer from the State Department here in Israel who consulted with me about the conditions on the Temple Mount, and naively I thought that he was very concerned about the religious freedom of all people, because the report is a report where the United States puts itself, as usual, as some sort of super policeman, responsible and caring, so-called, about human rights all over the world. And so they publish this report every year where they criticize and review various situations throughout the world, various countries, and talk about human rights abuses.
Right. So
in terms of religious freedom.
Right. So obviously, what they want is for everybody to be able to pray in their holy places. That's
that
religious
would be
freedom.
the definition of religious freedom.
I mean, of course, that's what they must want. However, there is an exception. And that exception is the Temple Mount, where, and this is year after year, they state the same thing, that it's important that Jews not be allowed to pray in the Temple Mount. And now they have little additional comment, kvetch, that they see that Israel is kind of,
Turning
being a
blind
little
eye.
less severe in this ban on Jewish prayer. And they make note of that, and they report that in most cases, police prevented these prayers, meaning there were dozens of arrests throughout the year of Jews who prayed. In most cases, police prevented these prayers, but in some cases, police seem not to notice the acts. So the police are not allowed to not notice these acts of Jews praying, which
So
is
the
a
report is
gross
critical.
violation of freedom of religion.
The report is critical of Jews who are trying to pray on the
Right,
Temple
and they're
Mount.
critical of police who didn't happen to notice that Jews were trying to pray in the Temple Mount,
Okay,
because
so
praying for a Jew to
United
pray in the
States
Temple Mount is a
culture-
violation of somebody's freedom
Okay,
of religion.
Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King and all the heroes of Gandhi and Mandela and all the leaders that represent the man struggling with the chains of oppression and rising up and being able to assert human dignity and freedom, that doesn't apply to the Jewish people.
Yeah.
So I don't know, to the listeners, do you understand the total hypocrisy, irony, and incredible gall, chutzpah, Pharaoh style, Abbas style of this report, that it's called the United States State Department's annual report on religious freedom? And instead of reporting the fact that Jews and Christians are not allowed to pray on the Temple Mount because of the Islamic stranglehold over the Temple Mount, which Israel must acquiesce to for some strange reason because of its very, very bizarre relationship with Jordan that's been officially declared as the custodians over all the holy sites in Jerusalem, including Jewish and Christian, instead of bemoaning the fact that only Muslims are allowed to pray on the Temple Mount, this United States annual report, State Department report on religious freedom is critical of the Jews who try to, and I quote, get away with praying on the Temple Mount, and critical of the Israel police for not coming down on them hard when they are caught. So am I hearing you right? Like, how is that part of a report of religious freedom where it's actually criticizing the fact that the Jewish religious freedom is not curtailed even more than it is curtailed? It's unbelievable. And it fits right in with the Torah portion. It fits right in with Pharaoh saying, I don't know who Hashem is. It fits right in with him saying, don't be encouraged by falsehood. It fits right in with the chutzpah, the gall, the arrogance of Abbas saying Jerusalem is not for sale, even though Jerusalem has no connection whatsoever to these people.
Another 2 points. Two other aspects of this year's report from the State Department. And again, they've been reporting the same thing for years and years and years, that Jews shouldn't be able to pray. Non-Muslims should not be able to pray in the Temple Mount. But now they're a little bit more agitated because they see that more Jews are going up to the Temple Mount. And one of their reasons this year that they gave was because of the incident this past summer where 2 Muslims were able to smuggle weapons onto the Temple Mount, rifles, guns, and from there murder 2 Israeli policemen, which created tension when Israel then moved to install greater security measures at the Temple Mount.
Which they took down
Which they
afterwards.
took down. So the State Department also says because of this heightened tension, which was caused by the murder of 2 Israeli policemen, Israel should be more strict about not letting Jews pray. You know, until now they had to make bricks. Now they have to get the straw to make the bricks. They couldn't pray before. Now they really can't pray. You have to make them really eat it when you catch them trying. Another incredible intrusion into business that's not theirs is in the same report, they had many suggestions for how Israel should conduct itself vis-a-vis the Jewish population at the Western Wall, which I'm not going to get into. But who is it their business at all to stick their opinion into an internal Jewish matter?
In other words, what goes on at the Western Wall is an internal affair which should be decided by Israel's religious authorities, because at least you say that that's our place, right? Of course, the Palestinians say that's also not our place. But here they meddle in this internal affair in the name of what they call pluralism, religious tolerance, and freedom of religion.
Right.
But when it comes to the ability for non-Muslims to pray, and specifically Jews, in the place that is their only holy site, because the Western Wall is not holy compared to the Temple Mount, when it comes to our right to be able to pray there, our being able to pray there is a violation of the religious freedom of the Muslims. So why not call the report, the annual State Department report, on the situation of the Muslims' rights?
Mm-hmm.
But they can't do that. So instead, this is how they couch it. But it is transparent and absolutely lewd. It is just absolutely amazing. And of course, the fact that Trump has declared Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and recognizes that historical continuity doesn't make any difference to the State Department.
No.
State Department is still not recognizing Jerusalem, Israel, as the birthplace of children that are born here.
Correct. So, where do we go from here, Rabbi? False news, denial of
That it's
the
all
truth.
about the same thing. That horrible, horrible article that you read about from Haaretz, where a person who believes in God is being called an idiot, right? It's because there is such a spiritual revolution going on in the state of Israel. And this is not fake news. This is the good news. The good news is that there are like powers that be that are getting frustrated, seeing how there is tremendous hope and encouragement going on in the land of Israel. There is a young generation that isn't afraid. The same kind of reporting from Haaretz and the same kind of attitude from the State Department is all about the same thing. It's about the fact that the Jews are winning. And it's very, very disturbing to those that want to blot out the identity of God in the world.
We've been down to the river. We see what Pharaoh's up to there, as you pointed out earlier. Pharaoh's magicians can no longer maintain the illusion of him being all-powerful. And again, this all applies to those powers to be in this world today, because this week's parasha about the Ba'era and about the plagues is really about what's going on in the world right now. So yes, the masks are coming off.
And it's all about the identity of Hashem. And that's what we're reading about in the Torah portion. And that's what the battle is all about. And it's ultimately, as we mentioned, it's about free choice. And hopefully the spirit of the soul that was created by Hashem, that's inside each one of us, will win out.
And one of the, as the plagues moved along, one of the additions in the later plagues is that what happened to the Egyptians did not happen to the Israelites, meaning that the Israelites were left alone in peace while plague after plague was raining down upon the Egyptians. Well, think about that also in today's context, I say, as we conclude about to conclude this week of Temple Talk. All these issues are so relevant. So as you read Va'era, as you read these portions concerning the Exodus, don't read it as ancient history. Don't read it as a beautiful story from the distant past. Read it as what is happening today, and find your place in the story as it's happening today.
Make your choice.
Make your own choices, and you have free will just like Pharaoh did. So make sure you make the right choices and not the self-centered I am
And don't listen to
the world
falsehood.
choices. So stay tuned and stick with the book of Exodus as we all make our way into freedom. Thanks for being with us. Temple Talk.